we're drawn to water because we're reassured, we're comfortable around water. And then having got to it, people often use water as a dwell space, as sort of an arrival area. And I think that's what I find. I find people like to get to a water feature and actually take the weight off their feet, either stop, sit, watch it, let kids play in it yourselves. It's a good place. If you get water right, it's a comforting, reassuring place, a thing to be around.
71% of our planet is covered by water. It sustains our cities, shapes our landscapes, and supports every living system we depend on. Yet most decisions that shape water are often made far from the water itself. This is the 71% podcast. Conversations with the people who live and work with water every day, and what it has taught them about responsibility, balance, and consequence.
David, welcome to the 71% podcast. How are you?
I'm really good, Ben. Thank you very much for inviting me. I've been looking forward to talking to you.
Same here. You're more than welcome, by the way. I think we're going to have a fantastic conversation. You've got plenty of experience in this industry. So, looking forward to hear some stories and some really good knowledge to come ahead. I guess my first question is then, how did you get into working in this industry? What drew you to working with water?
Well, there's a really interesting question, isn't it? And I suspect, like nearly everybody in our industry, we never, as we grew up, thinking we might be astronauts or pop stars or footballers or whatever, working in our industry wasn't really on the horizon, wasn't really something we were thinking about. So I sort of fell into it. And I'm sure that's a very common story for people working in the water industry. If I'm honest with you, I always knew I was going to end up making things and designing things. I was always interested in that. As a child, I was never far away from drawing something or making something. I was really lucky that when I was at school, I had a fantastic set of teachers who understood that although I was academically quite strong, I was fundamentally just very interested and very good at making things. I was always literally always making things with my hands and seeing. I liked as a child to make things for my own pleasure, things that had come out of my own mind. But then actually what gave me the most, what spurred me on was seeing the reaction it got from other people, see what they made of what I made. So at school, although it was an academic school, they had some fantastic workshops, really brilliant woodwork, metalwork, and engineering workshops. And I was very fortunate that as an A-level student, once I completed my O-levels, as an A-level student, I was able to focus on design, technology, engineering, maths, and some of the sciences. And I spent so much time in the workshops, designing things, making things, going on trips to see how factories worked, see how processes worked. And I was the only student doing this. I think it's a bit different now, but back when I was still at school, if you want, there were still technical colleges, and most people at A level that were going into an industry where they might be making things went to technical colleges, whereas I stayed on in the sixth form at school. So when I did very well with my A levels, and that just spurred me on more. And I chose at that time not to go to university. I knew that I would go through a university education at some point, but it wasn't right for me then. I didn't want to lose the impetus I had of making things. So I actually got a job as a draftsman with a company, and they happened to design and sell fountain equipment. Very small company. Back in the day, my job didn't exist. So I got a job with this company as a draftsman, and soon had to learn how to draw piping systems and pumps and things. But actually, I soon found out that I needed to learn. Well, my natural curiosity took me to wanting to understand more than how to draw them. So I used to spend my lunchtimes connecting pipes and pumps up and firing water into things, and generally being a bit of a nuisance. Learning how you throw water up, what happens when it comes down, what it looks like when water runs over something, how you stop the tap when you've got a disaster going on, that sort of thing. Um, and I very soon started going out to uh, you know, meet with the people who wanted our products. So, um, in those days, um, if a client, I mean, I'm talking about 1985. I was a 20-year-old. I shouldn't have been doing these things, but you know, if somebody wanted a fountain back in those days, they picked up a catalogue of fountain components and looked at what they did and sketched up a design using references that had happened before. Now, I started going out to see architects and landscape architects and engineers, a whole world I'd never really understood anything about, the architectural world or the construction industry, and was really lucky. I went off to meet people like Norman Foster and Richard Rogers, and these people were legends, even if you weren't into architecture. And what I soon found out was these people were as frustrated as I was feeling, and that all we were doing is repeating the same thing. So I learned to really appreciate and respect the creative power that was being constrained by the lack of precedent for doing something bold and new. So there were lots of fountains that were really repetitions of things that have been going on for many, many years. Um, so it got me interested. So I started looking at, right, well, okay, how do we move water around? How do I size pumps? How do I size pipe work? And the company I was with had some knowledge of this, but I'll be honest with you, they were very formulaic. Well, this is what we've always done. And my creative mind just wouldn't accept that. I was picking up catalogs outside of the fountain industry and just thumbing through and seeing, what there was in industry that could be applied. And as a young guy joining a fairly well-established small business, I was a little bit of a nuisance to them, I think, if I'm being truthful. So I started questioning everything. And anyway, very soon after that, I met up with a company that were a large water treatment process engineering company. And it just so happened that they had they were a really dynamic company. I mean, I learned so much from them. I would say I've learned a lot from everybody along the way, you know. Um, but I went to work for a water treatment company, and they opened a water feature division and set myself and my long-term colleague Ian Kirkpatrick up to head up a water features division. But while I was there, I just learned so much about how to run a business, how to make money, the pressures involved with that, how the industry worked, how you negotiate a contract, how you leverage, your expertise, um, you know, and maximize, value for that. But behind all of the business side that was going, I was learning so much about process engineering, water treatment systems, large scale, not the water feature industry really started with, and even today, I see that most people approach water treatment in the same way that domestic swimming pools are approached. It's the same systems. And
Mhm.
that's sort of fine for small entry-level water features. But on the big side, these are commercial processes we're talking about. And
Yeah.
what they taught me was the other side of things. They had a great controls division, designing control systems. So I just learned so much. And then while this was going on, I was still meeting new clients, learning about sculpture, learning about finishes, stonework, learning how stonework was quarried and machined, and you just lock it all away, you're, and so I sort of came through that, um, but kept wanting more. I worked really hard. I put myself at that point through the Open University. So I then was able, I mean, what an amazing organization the Open University is. It allowed me to carry on running 100 miles an hour at work. Um, and at the same time cherry pick courses taught by real experts, fantastic tutors. And I was able to cherry pick courses that were aligned with what I wanted to know more about. So I studied fluid mechanics. Why wouldn't I? To really understand how how water does why water does what it does, and why you can sometimes convince it to do something unusual. Modeling with mathematics, the real engineering behind stuff. Why, how, how we make water do what it does, what that means for a pump, what that means for electrical supplies, what that means for loadings, hydraulic shock and transference of energy. And I spent a lot of time learning, putting myself. I don't know what my tutors made of it, because I was asking the most specific questions, to what were random modules in their courses. But it was fabulous. So fluid mechanics, modeling with mathematics, structures. But also, all the while this engineering was going on, I had a real passion for design. I was fascinated by, um, the end product. Take all the engineering away. Once that's all taken for granted, I was interested in, but what does it look like? What do people make of it? What do people who aren't engineers, what do they think of this? What's the feedback? So I studied lots more design. Um, and yeah, and then 30 years ago, I set the Fountain Workshop up with Ian, and it's gone from there. Um, so, the ambition when we set the Fountain Workshop up was, we're very respectful of everything we'd learned to that point, but we thought we could do things differently, and we thought, we don't. Well, I certainly thought, you know, by the time I'm 60, which is what I am now, I was 30 then. By the time I'm 60, I don't want to be doing what I've been doing for the last 10 years for the next 30 years. So there'll be some interest in us taking things in a slightly different direction. So I made a conscious decision, Ben, not to recruit anybody ever that had worked in the water feature industry from that
Well,
point. Okay. Now there's some great talent out there, but everybody brings to their job, um, some preconceptions, their own, the things that they've succeeded with. Now I recruited. We, we've had hundreds of people come through the Fountain Workshop. Most people stay for a very long time, but we've got a fantastic team that we put together. We've had people from fine art, design, architectural technology, water treatment processes, and my technical design manager was from the aerospace industry,
wow.
IT specialists, electrical engineers, mechanical engineers. I've sort of managed to talent spot people from all of these specialist industries and bring them in, and to see what they add and give them specific. Our guys have got maximum freedom. I'm very all over everything they're doing, but I just sort of get out of the way and let them do it. It's you know they get passionate about what they do. They bring their special little realm of difference into the mix, and we are greater than the sum of our parts. We are. I think we're quite internationally recognized for being good at what we do, but we're quite a small company. There's less than 30 of us, but I think we punch well above our weight. And that's because our people are very focused, very energized, very enthused, and appreciated. Um, but we're very quick to put the hair shirt on. We're tough on ourselves. um, we do some great things, but we focus very much on what could be better every time. So that's my journey. That's where I've come from. I've you know a wise man once said, find a job you like and you never have to work another day in your life. Um, that's exactly it. Started the Fountain Workshop, and it's been fun every day. I love it. So that's been my journey. Now, if anybody thinking of getting into the water feature industry, I don't think that's the path to take, if I'm honest with you. But that's sort of what worked for me. And I love I love being here. I love having a range of people around me who are, both young, inexperienced, but with great potential, and and some more experienced, wiser heads here that are receptive to working alongside everybody else that we've got in the company. So um, what's not to like, really? So there you go. Long rambling answer to how did I get into this, Ben? I'm sorry if that was too long.
No, no, not at all. It's a fascinating journey. I think those kind of journeys exist out there across multiple different industries. It's just hearing the stories and the way people come to the point that they're in, I think is fascinating. You mentioned that the previous companies you'd worked for, there was a kind of a way of doing things specifically, and they didn't want to expand or look at different ways of doing things. What were those kind of trends that you noticed, and how have you taken that forward?
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand it. It wasn't really a criticism because, business is business. It's about making money, right? So you find
Exactly.
you find a formula that works for you, and it's making you money. Well, you don't want to mess around with it too much, isn't it? Do you? So
Exactly.
now, what I would say, the Fountain Workshop is entirely privately owned by, so we don't have quite the same pressures. We don't have a load of shareholders, so I don't have the same pressures of turning over a profit of a certain, increasing profits every year. So if we want to have a couple of years to try something different out, we can do that. Now, these previous companies, well, partly it. What I found with them was, someone would come to them with a project saying, we want a water feature here. And invariably, they were offered a blank piece of paper. Now, you give us a blank piece of paper and it doesn't stay blank for a second, right? We're all over it. But a lot of companies, you give them a blank piece of paper and it just stays blank forever because they don't have new
Yeah.
ideas. Original thinking, getting original thinking is sort of a risk. Somebody coming into a company with new ideas, it's a bit of a risk. Now, what I would say is, though what worked for those other companies is absolutely right for them. That's the positive, isn't it? It works for them, so they do more and more of it. Now, that's absolutely fine, but I didn't want to keep doing that.
Mhm.
So, I wanted to keep trying new things, testing new things, and that's actually, you know, we go to some board meetings and say, David, you've allowed a sum of money here for this job that we finished 6 months ago. What's that for? I said, well, I think it's great. Well, does the client think it's great? Yes, but I think it could be better. I want to spend another £1,000 or something, changing a few things. And I used to get the feedback, I'm sorry, we're not in the business of making things look pretty for you, look better for you. The client's happy with it. We've got the money,
Yeah.
move on, um, and actually that I found that hard, right? I found that hard, and I don't think we are finished at that point. Personally, I
Mhm.
think water features need to evolve. Um, yeah, when we get to test a water feature, that's a vital part of the design process. It's not a case of what did the specifications say? What's the client expecting? Have we met that? Have we done enough to get paid? That is not the Fountain Workshop approach. That's not never been my approach. That's one side of things. That's important. But have we got everything out of this that we can? That's taken it to the next level. And if that means that we need to spend a bit more money on it, well, I think that's our responsibility as both designers and contractors to do that. If you're just a contractor, you don't have that sense of obligation, I would say. So, um, in a word, I think it was, previous companies I'd worked for were very formulaic. They had a system that worked for them. Let's keep doing that. If it ain't broke, let's not try and fix it. So, but for me, everything's broken still. We can mend everything. We can make everything a little bit better, and that's sort of the culture here. Our guys. I don't really give our guys budgets to work to, you know, I set the budget on the job, I negotiate the contracts, we get a sum of money, and and quite often it's fairly woolly, fairly loose as to what we're going to give somebody for the money. It's our clients sometimes just don't understand what we're going to do for them. They know how much money that we've told them it's going to cost, and we've told them it'll be amazing, but actually the end product is sometimes a little bit different to what we started out looking to achieve. And that's because when we brief our guys on a new project, the design is still open. We're still open to ideas. And I would say best design wins. It's not my ideas or anybody's specifics. If the person that joined us last Tuesday has the best idea, that's what we're doing. Rather than me who's been here for 30 years. If it's a good idea and it takes us in a new direction, then we run with it. So yeah, that ability for us to evolve and adapt, and yeah, it's not unusual for me to come in after a trip abroad or something. Stop what we're doing. We're changing this, and
Yeah.
every pen's down. Just have a listen. Just can I run this past you? I think we should do this. I've just seen this. Right. I've just been to, the mountains in Oman or something and seen these amazing waterfalls. And this little detail was just fascinating. I think we can use that. We can bring that in here. What do you think? How do we make that work? And yeah, it's quite infuriating for the team sometimes, but they're never under pressure to, we know what the end date is for a project. That's what we've got to meet. And quite how we get there, it can change at any time. So that's quite a fundamental part of what the Fountain Workshop's about, I would say. Yeah.
You referenced earlier about you were looking at the way water and fountains make people feel.
Oh yeah.
So, what do you think water brings to a public space that nothing else can? And then, as a caveat to that, why are people naturally drawn to fountains? Because I know that I certainly am. Wherever I am, if I'm local, if I'm on holiday, and you see a fountain, it does bring me in. And why do you think that is?
Well, I think fundamentally we're comfortable around water, aren't we? There's something reassuring about water. We know, deep rooted in our ancestry, we know that we rely on it for life. And but there are dangers associated with it. Okay, everybody knows that. But water features in the public realm. They used to be objects. When I started, fountains were just that. There was a pool with an edge around it and a fountain, and we've moved away from that. Thank goodness. Water. What I would say is I sort of specialize in public realm water features. Okay, not domestic, not garden water features. We do some. We do some amazing private commissions and for those things. But I think what interests me most is public realm water features, which is what you're talking about. Where if you're walking through a public space, why are people attracted to water? Well, I think you are if it's good. They can be a real civic asset if they're good, and they can be an absolute civic liability if they're poor, and a risk and a nuisance. And so why are people attracted to it? Well, they're attracted to it if it's done well. Now that's the knack. That's the secret sauce, isn't it? What makes a water feature a good water feature? But we're attracted to water naturally. So as a designer trying to design good public realm water features, you're halfway there. You don't have to sell them. If you do a good job, people will love it. You said it yourself. You find yourself attracted to water. So why is that? Well, it's because we're reassured by water. People follow water. Ancestrally, you would have found, most villages and cities are shaped around rivers and streams and a water source and wells. Think about our great city in this country. All shaped around the Thames, and you've got the various wells around London, Sadler's Wells, and etc. We're drawn to water because we're reassured, we're comfortable around water. And then having got to it, people often use water as a dwell space, as sort of an arrival area. And I think that's what I find. I find people like to get to a water feature and actually take the weight off their feet. Either stop, sit, watch it, let kids play in it yourselves. It's a good place. If you get water right, it's a comforting, reassuring place. A thing to be around. But if you get it wrong, God, it can be a nightmare if you get water features wrong. They can be imposing, a little bit oppressive. And I think, honestly, the magic is just to make sure you respect it, really. Don't try and force it. Don't try and force water on people. If you get a design of a water feature right, um, and that means it works in harmony with its surroundings and the buildings and the people and the usage. If you get that right, well, it's not difficult to get right, I don't think. You just got to understand all those elements, and there's your ingredients. There's your tick box. Tick, 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 tick. You'll have a nice water feature. You don't have to work too hard at it. Personally, I see probably as many poor water features as good water features. Where I think people have tried to crowbar them into places.
Mm.
But honestly, everybody's getting better at it, and I think people are starting to appreciate it more. So, yeah, I think that's why we're drawn to it. I think it's reassuring and comfortable.
So, what for you? What's the difference between a fountain that looks good and one that works well over time consistently? Because I don't know the ins and outs of a fountain. I see it, like I said, I get drawn to it. It's, it does give you that sense of peace, and you can sit around it. But in the depths of the fountain, what for you is the real separator between, like I said, one that looks good and one that actually works well and consistently works well?
Okay. Um, I'm going to go back. I'll answer that question, but what I would say is, fundamentally, a water feature needs to be consistently safe and reliable. All right. So, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is that people need to be reassured by it. They don't. For a water feature to be reliable, it needs to fundamentally be safe. Now, the engineering behind a water feature is much more complicated than most people give it credit for. If you making sure the water is clean evokes feelings of purity and clarity. The emergence of a natural spring, that sort of thing, that the water has got a bit of a sparkle to it, doesn't give off too many smells of chemicals, or it just shouldn't give off any smell of chemicals, really. The water shouldn't. A successful water feature for me is one where you are celebrating the water and not how it's been achieved. So if you're seeing equipment, if you're seeing big, heavy chunks of kit that make the water feature work, if you're seeing cables, seeing bolts holding things down in the paving or on an edge, that's not so successful. People might say, well, that's necessary to make it maintainable. I'm sorry, that's just lazy. You can overcome all of those problems, right? If you take away out all of the how it's done, all you're left with is what it's doing, right?
Yeah.
If you can get to that point, you're 90% there to having a good water feature, right? And if you can get to that point and the water is consistently clean, consistently reliable, working, and adaptable and flexible, that'll give you a successful water feature. In the public realm, there are many types of different water features. You might have cascades, pools with plants in it, aquatic plants. But you might have, I think what people are thinking of these days is a lot of the pavement type fountains coming up through a pavement space, sort of thing we've done a great deal of. Our project at King's Cross at Granary Square is probably the benchmark of that for lots of people, and it covers a vast area, but it's super adaptable, right? So what makes it successful is that you've got a water feature that isn't just conceived of as a visual object defined by form. It's shaped by its daily use, its seasonal change and long-term life of it. It's not we've got this now, we'll be bored of it in 10 years' time. Um, it's not it's not gimmicky. It's adaptable. Scale and volume is important. You know, if you have a too showy jumping around fountain in a small space, it's a bit intimidating. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
And so, what makes a successful when you say water feature, there is a difference between a fountain and a water feature for me. I mean, a fountain is a type of water feature, but it's a category. Um, you know, the water features we designed at King's Cross. Sorry to keep bringing that back as a reference, but it's just that there are so many there for us to talk about. You know, I think we've got 14, 15 water features at King's Cross. But actually, before we started designing them, and I would say, okay, well, before we started working on those, the canal that runs through King's Cross was already there, right? So it's already had a fantastic water feature there already that you
Yeah.
work into the scheme. You know, don't take any credit for that, but you know, you have to work it into the scheme. Now, what makes a really brilliant water feature is not just what we do. You know, we don't work in isolation. Um, we work best when we are part of a collaborative team. So we work with the best architects, landscape architects, engineers, and above all, clients you could possibly imagine. You know, I don't take credit for everything we've done. You know, we play a part in that, but it's the best public realm water features are entirely collaborative. And I would say, you know, I can't think of us ever having a public realm project where we've worked in isolation, right? You know, they're all, you know, working as part of a team where everybody wants to achieve something. You know, we might have an input to what they're doing. They certainly have an input into what we're doing, and it brings it all together so that it's a shared response to the project. So it's that mixture between what the water's doing, what the paving is doing, what the buildings are doing, what the management of people are doing, events that are going on in a space, lighting, public realm lighting is so important. And it's really important for water features. The whole control and management of these things, that's what makes them successful. But yeah, I'm going to say something now about clients. You know, our clients for water features are often not really the clients that are paying the bills, right? They are our clients, but really we're designing for the general public. So if they're really what I think of as as our clients. You know, it's you know, what do they want? What are we going to do? Because if we make the public happy, they're the ones snapping away at the Instagram moments and social media going crazy. Um, and that makes our financial clients, uh, uh, you know, uh, our genuine clients, that makes them happy. So if we can deliver something that the public like, everybody benefits from that. So yeah, I don't know, a bit rambling there, Ben. I'm sorry, I've gone off on many tangents there.
No, not at all. I think you kind of touched upon it, but I was going to ask, what do you think the biggest misconception people have about fountains? Do you think it is the whole process that goes in behind it, and it's kind of not really appreciated about, as you say, looking at the surrounding buildings, looking at the lighting, the natural lighting? Do you think that's probably the biggest misconception?
I think if we've done our job right, there are loads of misconceptions because if we've done our job right, and the public don't notice half of what's made it successful. You know, the angle something might be sitting, so the light comes through this way, reflects off that, shines on that, changes in levels. When people see a water feature, they sort of veer towards it. There's so much that people underestimate about what goes into the planning. God, we've spent hours discussing, you know, whether we did a channel at More London at London Bridge between the Tower of London, not the Tower, London Bridge and Tooley Street. Lovely project with Foster and Partners and Townsend Landscape Architects, 25, nearly 30 years ago. And that we put a rill in quarter of a mile long down the middle of a walkway. And I mean, everybody said, God, this will be a nightmare. People will be falling in it, doing all of those things. Fantastic client, who listened, and we said, look, honestly, I don't think people are going to fall into this. People just step over it. It's like stepping over a curb or something. And we spent ages working out what the width of that reel should be over a quarter mile. Should it be that wide? Should it be that wide? And literally, I tell you, we spent probably 4 weeks trying to decide whether it should be 350 millimeters wide, 370 millimeters wide, 420 millimeters wide. Where our office is based, we're in the historic dockyard, a museum in Chatham. And there's a building here, the ropery, where they used to make rope. And it's a quarter of a mile long, same length as our reel was going to be. So we were lucky. All down one side of this building is windows. All right. So we went up onto the top floor of this, and we laid out ropes on the floor, quarter of a mile long, at various different widths, so we could see the sun shining through to accentuate the width of these gaps to a quarter of a mile long. And we just kept adjusting it. It took ages, but to get it just right. So and we got it right, and it looked fantastic. And from one end, you could see the reflection of the water disappear to a point at the other, but it reached the end. If we got it wide, it would have been too wide at the top, or it would have disappeared halfway along. Those sorts of things are often underestimated. But I think the biggest misconception people have about water features is they waste a lot of water, they use a lot of power, they're not safe, they're very expensive to maintain. I would say those things are people's most, they're the most prominent misconceptions. They're the biggest comments I hear, negative comments I hear when we're talking about embarking on a project with a water feature. So and they're all misconceptions. Yes, you can make it expensive, make it thirsty, make it wasteful, and make it difficult to maintain. Yes, you can do all of those things. But absolutely, you don't have to do any of those things. You can make them very, very sustainable, use very little water, little power, and very easy to maintain. So I think those are the biggest misconceptions. And I would say a mistake I learned very early on, that I still see being made by companies today, is that when they scale up the size of a project, they do it wrong. All right. So if you have a project with, say, 20 fountains on it, I'd say you've done 100 projects with 20 fountains in public, we've made 20, 50 fountains in a public square. You do that, you do it well, you make money, the client's happy, it's manageable, that's great. And then somebody comes to you and says, well, we want a bigger one. Can you do one with 90 jets or 100 jets? So yeah, of course we can. We just do 2 of that. That's where the mistake creeps in, when you just scale up what you've done before, because you can sort of manage it when you scale up in small chunks. But when you have a project where you want to use 1,000 fountains, scaling up what you did when you had 100 is a massive mistake. All right. Because you don't just scale up the end result, you scale up all the problems you had. So something that was manageable when you had 10 fountains, you might once a month have to change something. But when you've got 1,000 fountains, suddenly you've got 100 times the problems you had. And then that becomes unmanageable. So better still, what you do is you should actually say, okay, let's not design as if we've got 1,000 fountains. How would we do this job if we had 100,000 fountains? Right? Now, you can't scale up a small problem 100,000 times, can you? So you then have to start thinking very, very differently. So, well, let's do what we do if we had 100,000 fountains, but we just do 100th of it. That takes you in a very different path, right? Suddenly you're no longer thinking like a fountain company. You're thinking like NASA, you're thinking like a process engineering company of, yeah, right. Well, I don't want those problems. How are we going to do that? And then, how are we going to control that? So that's probably the core strength of the Fountain Workshop, is anticipate, because we're good engineers at the heart of it. We can design unencumbered. We design what we're doing without having to think about how we're going to do that, because I know the solution is there. We've got the team here to do that. So we can be entirely free to say, what do we want to do with this water? That's great. We'll do that then. And then if people ask us how we're going to do it, I said, well, we'll come back to you on that. But we will do that,
Yeah.
and it'll be manageable. So that, and then you have no choice but to solve the sustainability issue. You have no choice but to solve the safety issue, because when you've come at it from a bigger scale and you've reined it in, all of those problems have been solved, and to the point where we actually anticipate failures further down the line. We're not Nostradamus, but we can pretty much predict when things are going to fail, when things are going to come to the end of their life. So we're able to say to our clients, this project that's been running for 15 years, next year you need to be budgeting for X to replace that, and the year after that, Y for replacing that. And, clients don't always have the funds available to do that, but they listen to that. That's really a big focus of our clients is, yeah, this is great, but when it stops being great, the phone doesn't stop ringing. We get a lot of bad press. That's the that's the downside of having done something amazing. When it stops being amazing, you get criticized, don't you? So we need to manage that. So those are all really important parts of our job, and we see that as our job, to bring those things to our client. We don't wait for our client to say, what do we do when it goes wrong? We go to our clients early on and say, when this goes wrong, this is what's going to happen, and this is how we're going to manage it for you. But you've got to do your part, Mr. Client. Can you get some money together for it? Can we plan this in so it's going to be convenient for you and us? And so we try and poke that situation. We don't hide from it. We try and bring it to the fore. Sometimes before our clients really want to hear about it, they've only just started getting basking in the glory of having a fantastic thing, and we're already telling them that, well, hang on a minute, don't get too confident. We've got to start thinking about the next stage and the next stage. Yeah.
So how does water behave differently in reality compared to how it's designed? Because you've just talked a lot there about, real world operation and your experience based on, having a plan and actually sticking to that plan and what's realistic. So in reality, how does the water behave differently compared to a design? Because you just touched upon it. You can design something, you can design and keep going and design this amazing thing. But in reality, it's a different prospect.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty unpredictable. We think of ourselves as experts, don't we? But we never cease to be amazed at how water seems to have a mind of its own and the way that it functions. I'm trying to think of an example. If I think of one later in this podcast, I'll bring it to you, Ben. But quite often we've been surprised at what water does. The way it's very easy to underestimate the sound of water. Okay, we've designed the most amazing things, but quite often the noise it makes. I'll give you an example here, right? So we designed a project with 1,080 fountains on it at King's Cross. Okay, when we come to commission that, what do? You turn each jet on one at a time and get them to work, and you make sure everyone's working, and then you address each one, and then we devise a way to control them and commission it. Now, you can do as much as you like on the computer screen before you've built the thing, right? And say, well, we'll have it doing this, and we'll play some music in the background, and the jets are waving from this side and that. And then you get to site, and our guys, so that we could test it, our guys developed an app for our phones using the accelerometer in your phone to control the fountains. It started really as a commissioning tool. How are we going to commission 1,080 fountains? Because when they're all running, how do you know which one is fountain 148, right? You can't count them in. You can't tell which is which. They're all just doing their own crazy thing. So we set up each fountain addressed, and using the accelerometer in our phones, we're able to stand in the square, turn them on one at a time, and lift your phone up and the jets go up, put your phone down, they go down, shake them around and they jump about.
Wow.
And one day I was there, we'd got it all working, and I was sitting in the square with my phone, playing with the jets, right? Just we would guys were developing a phone app to play the snake game where you move the jets around. So we did this in 2011. And so that people could play, and if you bump into each other, the jets stop and you lose your tap. But when we were testing that, I was just we had just one fountain on. The whole square was empty and just one jet working. And the people were walking past, looking at this one jet, thinking that's a bit weird. And then it would move around, and the students at the university there would all sit down. They were having a great time pointing and laughing at this thing. And there was a businessman stood in the middle of the square on his phone. Said, "Hello, Charles." Yes, so talking away, and you noticed that he would go and stand by the fountain while he was talking. He wasn't paying attention to what he was doing, but he was stood by the fountain. So I then moved the fountain, and he'd move over towards it. So I was moving this guy around the square, having a great, real laugh with him. And the students all twigged what I was doing. And the students, "Are you doing that?" So I am doing that. And so suddenly I then put another jet on. And this guy is on his phone. He's, "Now, do I go to this one or that one?" Well, he didn't know he was doing it. And he had this 20-minute conversation while we were moving him around the square. Fantastic. So we sort of worked. Anyway, that all finished. But what that taught me is, yeah, the 1,080 fountains is our canvas, but we actually only needed one fountain to really animate the space. Now, I hadn't anticipated that. So actually, what we learned is if there's an event going on in that space, that massive space, and we just put fountains on at one end, people will congregate at that end. So we might have tall fountains at one end where the kids and the livelies are playing around with it, and maybe parents with toddlers in pushchairs. We have little fountains at the other end, a sort of safe space, and they go and congregate over there. And we maybe put some reflection pools in the center, which are a bit more cerebral, shall we say, reflecting the building and the light, and it's still safe to walk through. And so just, what you learn is no matter how much you think you've designed, water, it informs you how it's going to perform. And then the sound of the jets, we worked out that if we fire the jets up and stop them and they slap down on the ground, we could create sort of marching patterns of sound with the jets. Fantastic. So you could create a rhythm, whoom, whoom, and the water slap, slap. Sorry, I try not to slap the table because it probably messes your microphone up. But that sort of thing, really fascinating. And then watching children interact with water, they're not taught anything, are they? I'm talking about toddlers. They just go and they instinctively play with water. They haven't learned it. It's not like teenagers have seen other people doing something and copy it. They're just completely absorbed by the wonder of playing with water. So it teaches you some unusual things. And it's taught me a great deal of respect for water. I think also, I've traveled extensively looking at water. We've done we do a lot of work in the Middle East and the Far East, and, looking at how water is used by different cultures and appreciated by different cultures has taught me so much. And there are lessons there that we try and bring to all of our projects. Well, you can't turn the tap off, can you? Pardon the pun, but once it's in your mind and it's an influence, it's an influence. So yeah, that's really important. Looking at how water is used in different parts of the world and how we can bring that as an idea, as a concept, and deliver that in our projects. We throw it into the melting pot with all of our collaborators, as I say, with the landscape architects and clients, and some of it resonates and gets traction, and some of it gets, well, thanks very much, but not for us at this time, thank you. And so we park it. Well, I think the biggest threat to our local waterway is waste of water, really. I know there's a lot of focus on pollution, but I think there's still far too much wasting of water happening. And speaking as somebody who relies on the availability of water to continue to enrich people's lives with fountains, I'd like to make sure it doesn't run out, and that we have some capacity for doing something creative with it to enrich our lives.